Hello everybody, this is Connor, BoatsDon'tSink, here with another Shadowverse Evolve deck profile. This time we're going to be looking at the Dimension Shift Rune deck, or Kuon Rune as you might see it called quite often. One of the probably most anticipated new decks out of Set 6. So before we jump into the deck, as always, just use this as a starting point. This one is actually the list that won the CP02 Grand Prix in Japan, which was a very similar format to our BP06. The introduction of Idolmaster Cinderella Girls changed the format a little bit, but not significantly, other than just introducing the Cinderella Girls deck itself. And I think moving from the BP06 Grand Prix into the CP02, a lot of the Dimension Shift list kind of refined themselves. They weren't as prepared for an aggro metagame initially, and kind of adjusted to be a little better into the aggro decks. So I think this list is maybe a little more representative of what you should be expecting people to be playing, what you should expect this deck to look like. But as always, especially since this is a Rune deck, there are a lot of toolboxing options, and there are probably a lot of options that you can swap in and out to fit your own playstyle or your own meta needs. So the list itself is, as I said, a bit more toolboxy than some of the other lists we've looked at. Not as many just straight 3-ofs. We have quite a lot of 1-ofs in this deck. And that's not really necessarily because this is teched for a specific meta, but as I said, more just because Rune does have the ability to toolbox spells quite easily, using cards like Merlin. So it benefits us a lot more to play these 1-ofs than just maxing out at 3 of absolutely everything. As always, you can use the decklog code in the bottom corner. It's going to be 3FKHW, or the link in the description to check out the decklog page for this deck. We do see a lot of familiar faces here. Most of the same early game removal spells that we've always played. Merlin, Penguin Wizard. If you've played Dimension Shift since really set 1, you'll be very familiar with a lot of these cards. But we do have an entire new package introduced in BP06 here with the Onmyoji cards. And let me tell you, they are quite powerful. So we'll take a closer look at them in a minute. Our Evo deck is pretty simple. This deck doesn't play a lot of followers, so we're pretty much just maxing out on everything that can evolve. The only thing in our list actually that that we don't have an evolve for is the 3rd copy of Demon Caller. So you should pretty much always be able to evolve anything that you draw in the deck. We are playing 16 followers and 24 spells, which might be one of the first times on this channel that we've looked at a deck with more either spells or amulets than followers in it. And a pretty low curve, actually, surprisingly, for a deck like this. When you see 12 and 15 drops and even a 7-cost spell, you think, oh, this curve's going to be pretty high. But no, we still have over half of our deck just being 1 and 2 drops. And what is this, like 31 cards? So over 3/4 of our deck is still at 3 cost and lower. So we actually don't have a very heavy curve. It should still be very easy to just play out everything you draw. You shouldn't have to worry too much about that. And we have so much hand filtering in this deck that bricking shouldn't really be an issue either way. Jumping into the specific cards, we start off with 3 copies of Angelic Snipe. This is just 1-cost quick timing, deal 2 to an enemy follower. This can also be replaced with the Uma Musume version, Lamplet Training. That card is basically the same thing, it's just Runecraft, deal 2 damage. There are slight benefits one way or the other if you're playing specific cards. In this list in particular, neither one would be better. You'll often see them played at a split in these lists, maybe just to mask how many total they're playing. Maybe lead your opponent to think you might have 4 or more copies. For the sake of fitting all these cards on one slide, we're just playing 3 Angelic Snipes here. This is really good for just answering a lot of the early aggro cards right now. One of this deck's biggest weaknesses is decks that just play a lot of followers early before you really get to your good removal. And having ways to answer them as they come down rather than taking hits early on can really help you stay alive and stabilize into the mid and late game. Next, we have 3 copies of Insight. This is just a 1-cost quick timing draw card. This gives you something else to do on turn 1. If you're able to just pass on turn 1, especially if you go first and hold up a play point for an Angelic Snipe, If your opponent's playing a deck where they don't play out a 1-drop, you can just use that play point to Insight instead, so you're not wasting your play points. It's just really good throughout the game. At any point where you can hold up one play point for Angelic Snipe, being able to also use it for Insight if you don't have to use the removal is great. It's also just the cheapest card that can help us fill our cemetery while also cantripping. Since, of course, this is a spell chain deck, we have a number of cards that need either 7 or 10 or even 15 spells in our cemetery, and getting one in for as cheap as Insight can while still replacing itself is quite useful. We play one copy of Wind Blast. This is maybe the most unnecessary one of in the deck, but it still serves a bit of a purpose. It's 1 cost, deal 2 to an enemy follower, not quick timing like Angelic Snipe, but the trade-off, the benefit you get is at spell chain 10, so 10 spells in Cemetery. You get to deal 4 damage instead, which can make this essentially the cheapest way to remove 4 defense followers in like the mid and late game, where you might want to be getting, just like 1 extra card in your Cemetery for as cheap as possible, so you can play it alongside other cards more easily. And it still answers relevant bodies on board. As opposed to Angelic Snipe just killing, like, basically 1-drops. Penguin Wizard is a 2 of in this deck. You'll see it at 3 a lot of the time. I think either is fine. A lot of people will argue that you don't even need Penguin Wizard in this deck. It's essentially just here to speed up our spell chain. Its ability is that you can engage it and discard a spell to draw a card. This pretty much is here just to turbo out all of our spell chain requirements, get us to them as fast as possible. One of the ultimate goals of this deck is to be able to hit all of your spell chain thresholds by turn 7, which is the earliest turn that you can play Dimension Shift. And if you can do that, you can usually win on curve. It is a bit hard to get there consistently, I think, but Penguin Wizard can help a lot, being able to discard a card for free basically every turn. Your main targets to be discarding with this, Trail of Light, obviously. It's a spell that when you discard it, you draw a card, which means you'll actually be increasing your hand size off of Penguin Wizard. The other cards you want to be discarding are a lot of these slower spells in the deck that you're mainly intending to cast via Merlin Evolution. On Evolve, Merlin gets to play a spell for free from your cemetery. Being able to use her to get these slower 3-drops out instead of just hard casting them from hand can be pretty good. So Penguin Wizard can be a way to discard them if you end up drawing them early. Penguin Wizard also evolves for 1 play point. On Evolve, it just refreshes itself, which allows you to use its ability again in the same turn. Alternatively, since it does have 2 attack in the very early stages of the game, especially if you go second on 2 with an evolution point, you can play Penguin Wizard, activate his ability, and then evolve him, and attack your opponent's 1-drop to clear off like a goblin or whatever, and you'll still have a 2-3, which is usually more than those decks are going to want to be spending resources on removing, so it's not likely you lose your Penguin Wizard by doing that. We play 2 copies of Traditional Sorcerer. This is one of the new Onmyoji followers. It's a 2-cost 1/4. Whenever a Shikigami follower is put onto your field, give it Ward. Fanfare, if there are at least 7 spells and Onmyoji cards in your cemetery, summon a paper Shikigami token and give your leader +2 defense. So this is a little different from the normal spell chain that we're used to seeing, where we count these spells in cemetery. This not only counts your spells, but also counts Onmyoji cards. There are 4 Onmyoji cards that are not spells, being the 4 followers that we play. Traditional Sorcerer, Demon Caller, Curse Crafter, and Kuon. This basically just means it's easier requirement to meet than Spell Chain, since of course it still counts all of your spells. It means that playing these followers as sort of tempo cards to be removal or just pressure your opponent, try to start chipping away at their life, doesn't really slow down your quote-unquote spell chain requirements as much on any of the cards that also check for Onmyoji. The token that this brings out is a 2-cost 2/2 with last words, draw a card, discard a card. This is great because it means that we're able to play followers and play things that make these paper Shikigamis and still fuel our spell chain requirements at the same time, since we'll be able to draw and discard and get cards into our cemetery. Traditional Sorcerer in particular is great for just sort of being a defensive card that can stall out Once we hit that 7 threshold, getting 2 defense to our leader and making a 2/2 ward can be pretty good at just blocking a little bit of incoming damage, buy us another turn or two. And since it counts every Shikigami follower, the token that Kuon can make at the end of the game is a 4/5 with Aura, and being able to give that ward can also buy a pretty significant amount of time, since your opponent will have to find 5 attack to put into it, since they can't use removal spells on Aura. Next, we play 1 copy of Chain of Calling as a 2-cost quick timing spell. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck. You may reveal a Runecraft follower from among them, add it to your hand, put the rest on the bottom, and if you're at spell chain 10, you can recover 1 play point. Generally, you're just going to be wanting to use this to find Kuon, since you will need ideally multiple copies of Kuon for your finisher turn, but if you have to play this in the early game, finding things like Merlin and Cursecrafter are still perfectly fine, because they're great cards to just sort of transition you through the mid game and get you into that Kuon position more consistently. We also play 1 copy of Rhymewind. So this is a 2-cost quick timing removal spell. You select an unevolved enemy follower on the field and return it to its owner's hand. Spell chain 10, put it on top of its owner's deck instead. It usually really doesn't matter whether you're putting it back to hand or top of deck. Obviously, if you put it on top of their deck, they have to sort of burn their draw on the next turn, drawing it again instead of just getting it for free, which is better. But you're using this generally to just stop things that would kill you, which doing that in either manner is good enough. Since tokens are pretty much always unevolved, this is great against things like Fairy Forest, where they might be swinging a 4/4 or 5/5 Storm Fairy token at you. Otherwise, it's good for just storm threats that can come down. Aragavi that comes down as like a 6/5, or Genesis Dragon, of course, just the giant chunk of damage that it is. These are things that are too big for all of our other quick timing removal spells to handle, since most of them are only dealing like 2 to 4 damage. All of our higher damage removal spells are just slow speed, basically. So Rhymewind is our one way to answer these, and it's generally a card that you'll want to hold on to in hand once you draw it, just as a sort of safety card to have. We play 3 copies of Shikigami Summons. This is one of the new Onmyoji spells. It's actually pretty much the only spell in the Onmyoji archetype. It's summon a paper Shikigami token. If there are at least 7 spells and Onmyoji cards in your cemetery, draw a card. So, of course, we do get to make the paper Shikigami. This is pretty good as just an on-curve, like, 2-cost 2/2, since it's both putting itself into your cemetery as a spell, and when the paper Shikigami dies, you'll get to discard another card. So it's 2 cards in cemetery for the cost of 1, which is great. But as you get into the later game, once you have that 7 threshold and are able to draw a card back off this, it becomes just super efficient way to churn through your cards. And since a lot of the other Onmyoji cards, Traditional Sorcerer, of course, gives them a ward, which, you know, using this to make extra wards can be pretty good. But our other Onmyoji followers either can give them Rush, or have the ability to sack the tokens off to deal damage, which means that we can just play this to immediately make the token and immediately get rid of it, and just churn through cards very quickly. Oftentimes, once you hit the sort of 6, 7, 8 play point area, running out multiple Shikigami summons in a turn is very doable, and can just sort of burst out however much remaining spell chain you need to fill up. We play 3 Surefire Bullet. No surprise, 4 sets later, this is still one of the best removal spells in the game. 2 cost quick timing, select an enemy follower on the field, deal it 3 damage. If it's an evolved follower, deal 4 instead. This still just happens to line up with a lot of good followers as being enough to remove them for 2 play points at quick timing, which is great. It's just hitting all of the 4 defense evolved followers that are still relevant every set. It seems like every meta, even if it's not the same ones, there are just even more relevant 4 defense Evo followers. So right now, things like Floral Fencer, Elven Princess Mage, and Demon's Epitaph, among the infinite others that I could name, this is going to be good removal for. So just always a great card to be drawing. 3 copies of Trail of Light, of course. If we are discarding cards, this is the best card to be discarding. When it is discarded, you draw a card. Alternatively, if you hard cast it, you get to draw a card as well, but that is not card advantage, so we don't really want to be doing that. This is just what we want to discard off of our Penguin Wizards and Paper Shikigamis. Since those are replacing the card we discard anyway, we actually go +1 in hand size every time we discard a Trail of Light. With these 2 things, the Penguin Wizard and the Shikigami token being the only forms of discard we have, it may not seem super consistent. You may think you might get stuck with Trail of Lights in hand every now and then. But we have so many ways to make the Paper Shikigamis that that's never really going to be an issue. We'll pretty much always have a way to get rid of any Trail of Lights that we draw. Moving into our 3-drops, we have another Onmyoji follower here. This is Demon Caller. He's a 3-cost 3/3. Whenever a Shikigami follower is put onto your field, give it +1 attack and rush. He evolves for 1 into a 4/4, and on evolve summons a Paper Shikigami token. So that means he makes a 3/2 rush that you can immediately trade in to get a draw discard, which is obviously very powerful, helps fuel our strategy pretty efficiently. It also just means that you get a 4 attack and 3 attack follower that both are able to rush in immediately as removal, which is a pretty easy, like, trade your 1 guy out of hand, your 1 Demon Caller from hand for 2 of your opponent's followers. The stats line up pretty well to where you can answer like a 2-drop and a 3-drop if you're going second, or even like a 3-drop and a 4-drop sometimes. And you're also getting the draw discard off the Paper Shikigami. So this is just one of the many hyper-efficient forms of removal we have in the mid-game. In addition, since it gives all of your Shikigami followers +1 attack and rush, similar to the traditional Sorcerer, once you get to the end game where you're playing Kuon, if you have a Demon Caller out, you're able to +1 attack the token that Kuon makes, the 4/5 Aura, and turn it into a 5/5 Aura with Rush, which that part doesn't matter as much since Kuon will likely be giving it Storm anyway, but that extra bit of damage can help you close out games a little more consistently. Next up, we have 3 copies of Merlin. This will pretty much always be a 3 of in any spell-based rune deck. 3-cost 3/2 Fanfare. Search your deck for a spell, reveal it, add it to your hand. Obviously, the list of options here is nigh unlimited. You can get whatever spell best fits the scenario you're in. Generally, this will be searching some of the harder to find spells like Rime Wind or Crimson Meteor Storm, or if you've not yet drawn a Dimension Shift, searching out one of those to have for your finisher turn. However, sometimes, depending on the scenario, you may search out a Trail of Light if you already have a way to discard it immediately just to get card advantage, or any number of other things. It evolves for 2 into a 4/3. On evolve, you select a spell that costs 3 or less in your cemetery and play it for 0, which allows you to play, ideally, the 3-cost spells that are a little too slow to be playing from hand a lot of the time. Things like Concentration, Truth's Adjudication, or Witch Bolt. Witch Bolt in particular is a great removal spell to play off Merlin, since it allows you to draw a card if you have an evolved follower, and the evolved Merlin that's allowing you to play it will always meet that requirement. Looking at those spells in particular, Concentration is 3-cost, give your leader +3 defense, draw a card. Earthright, you get to draw 2 instead, but you'll never meet that requirement in this deck, since we're not playing any stack amulets. This is basically just here for some of the matchups where you might be taking a lot of like burn damage, so things like Disdain Dragon. You can just get a little bit of extra defense to sustain against them while also refilling your hand. It's probably the least important of these options, and probably the one that is most easily cuttable. It is sometimes just a little too slow, even in the matchups where you do want the healing, as opposed to just having extra removal to sort of keep yourself safe. Truth's Adjudication is our replacement for the old Demonic Strike. This is choose one of the following. If there are at least 2 mage followers on your field, choose up to 2 instead. It is very unlikely that you'll meet that requirement. The only mage follower we play is Merlin. So you'd have to have 2 Merlin on board. So generally, you're just going to be picking one mode here. Option 1 is draw 2 cards. Option 2 is deal 3 to each enemy leader. Option 3 is deal 3 to an enemy follower. So this can be removal if it needs to be. 3 cost for a 3 to an enemy follower is pretty bad when you look at things like Surefire Bullet. Usually you will want to be using this for 3 damage to the enemy leader. And if you're able to avoid drawing this card, or even just if you draw it and are able to hold it in hand for the majority of the game, one of the good finisher options that you have is playing a Merlin to search this card, playing the card to deal 3 to your opponent, and then evolving the Merlin to deal 3 more damage to your opponent. That's essentially 6 storm damage for 8 cost, or 7 with an Evo point, which you'll always be able to do on the follow-up turn to your Dimension Shift. Since Dimension Shift comes out at 7 at the earliest, you can D-shift on 7 and then attack your opponent with all your followers, and then use your 8 play points to get 6 extra burn damage. Allows you to hit pretty much most of the thresholds that you'll need for lethal damage. If you have to discard it early, though, no worries. You can still just use your Merlin to get whatever else, Evo it, and cast a Truce Adjudication for 3 extra damage out of your cemetery. Witch Bolt. This is one of the better removal spells in the deck, just because of how much damage it deals. And if you cut the concentration, this is a pretty viable option just to add a second Witch Bolt instead. It's select an enemy follower, deal 5 damage, and if you have an evolved follower, draw a card. One of the notable things about this, it's probably the one that you actually least want to discard out of these options as well, because in the early game, if you draw it, evolving a Penguin Wizard on turn 2, or even turn 3, allows you to curve pretty much straight into a Witch Bolt that is going to draw you a card from your evolved Penguin Wizard. And Penguin Wizard having 5 defense makes it very hard to remove. It's unlikely that you will not have an evolved follower if you do evolve the Penguin Wizard. Witch Bolt is also just really good early for answering the sort of bigger threats that Surefire Bullet can't handle. We looked at a number of unevolved 4 defense followers when we were talking about Wind Blast. But in addition, just any of the various 5 defense followers out there, even Surefire Bullet can't answer like evolved 5 defense followers. So using Witch Bolt to handle things like Olivia, Lyriel, or Wilbert can be one of your only ways to efficiently handle those cards. Especially since like Demon Caller is only a 4/4, Curse Crafter deals 4 damage. Those are all going to take like multiple instances of damage to be able to take these 5 defense followers out. Speaking of Curse Crafter, this is our only 4 cost card. This card is honestly just not okay. This is maybe the best follower in the game right now, maybe the best card in the game right now. It's just insanely overspec. This card is actually limited to 1 copy per deck in Japan, as a result of this deck in particular, though it honestly helps every Rune deck. I've been testing a lot of like Lashena, and this card is kind of just insane there as well. Yeah, it has a lot of text on it. You can see that. It's a 4-cost 2/2. Fanfare, summon a Paper Shikigami token. Activated ability, bury a Shikigami follower, so we can sack the token off. Select an enemy follower on the field and deal it 4 damage. For the rest of this turn, this card's activated abilities, except for Evolve, can't be activated. This basically just means you can only do this once per turn. But that's fine. You play the 4-drop, make the token, sack the token, deal 4 damage. That's already quite good. It's basically just a 4/4 or a 4-drop 2/2 that deals 4 on play and also allows you to draw discard. However, this has an evolve for 1 into a 3/3. On evolve, you select an enemy follower, deal it 2 damage. If you have 7 spells or Onmyoji in your cemetery, deal 4 instead. So now we have a 4-drop Evo that lets us deal 4, draw ditch, deal 4 again, and then still swing with a 3/3. So that is potentially triple removal at a relevant number. Like 4 damage can clear most things this format, honestly, since the format is so like aggro heavy. Between like a handful of aggro decks and even a lot of the mid-range decks, their cards, there's a lot of just like 4 defense cards. Things like Saintly Leader. So this card is like often 3 for 1ing while also letting you draw ditch off your token dying. If this thing, you know, say you only have to kill 2 things, you don't have to swing with the Curse Crafter. If your opponent lets it live and your next turn you play a Shikigami summons, make another token, draw a card, you can sack that token to deal 4 to something else. So this card's kind of just infinite value at that point. Really powerful. It's just the best removal card that you want to have ready for turns, 4, 5, 6. Since it's going to allow you to filter through your cards, remove everything your opponent plays, and it is also an Onmyoji follower, so it will still count toward your requirements for things like Kuon. Yeah, this card, I can't speak highly enough of this card. Bushiroad side games, please restrict this in English. This card's insane. Moving into our last few cards here, we have Crimson Meteor Storm. Is a 7-cost spell. Seems a bit high, but it has niche uses. It's important when you need it. Spell chain 10, it costs 2 less to play, which makes it only a 5 cost if we can get the 10 spells. It's unlikely we'll have 10 spells by turn 5, but it does mean that on turns like 6 and 7, we can play it and another card if necessary. Deal 6 damage to each enemy follower. Each enemy follower on the field. Deal 3 to each enemy leader. This is a board wipe. It's quite good for answering things like the Gensetsu token boards, a giant board that your opponent just makes off like a courtly dance where they get like 4 followers, or the forest boards where they like wisp Spinaria into 2 more cards. It's one of your only ways to clear like really wide boards like that efficiently. And it's also 3 damage to the enemy leader, so it is a little more burn damage that sets up your lethal turns a little better. It is also a great card for the follow-up to your Dimension Shift. Say on 7, you set up all of your followers and play the Dimension Shift, take the extra turn. On your extra turn, you can then play Crimson Meteor Storm to clear whatever wards your opponent has, so that your followers can get through into your opponent's face, and you're also getting the 3 burn damage. You do lose a little bit of value doing that, because Kuon can normally give Storm. If you're waiting to use Meteor Storm to clear wards, you're going to lose out on that Storm damage. But, you have to do what you have to do. It's probably better than just crashing your guys into the wards. And if they have a lot of wards, you're not going to be able to clear them all with Storm anyway. Next up, we have, of course, Dimension Shift, the sort of main card of the deck. It's a 12-cost spell, meaning there's no way to just play it from hand normally. When playing it, you can banish 10 spells in your cemetery to make it cost 7 play points instead of 12. The effect is to take another turn after this one. So basically our win condition here, most of the time, is going to be filling our cemetery with spells throughout the game, of course. On whatever turn we're ready to go off, we just play as many followers as we can. The ideal thing here is playing Kuon. His effect allows you to reduce cost to 0 if you have enough cards in cemetery. But even if you're just playing them for like 1 or 2, you get however many Kuons you can, however many other cards you can, and then play Dimension Shift, take an extra turn. Since they were on the board at the start of your turn, you're able to attack with them immediately, so your opponent doesn't get a good chance to interact and remove whatever you've played. Generally allowing you to hit them for 14 or so damage pretty easily. And if you've done any damage before that, or on your next turn, you'll still have at least 8 play points to use for things like Merlin or playing just more followers. You can close out the game from there pretty easily a lot of the time. So, great card. It is our win condition. We're only playing 2. This deck only has 24 spells only. But since you have to banish 10, it's actually unlikely you'll get 20 spells in Cemetery in a reasonable time frame to be able to play 2 of these. It'll probably happen infrequently in the longer, grindier control matchups, where your opponent's maybe healing a lot and you have to find the double D shift to take 3 turns and attack to deal 25, 30, 35 damage. Most games the 1D shift will be enough. So we're just playing 2. You can search it with Merlin. If you ever end up clogging on it, you can discard an extra copy to your Penguin Wizards or whatever. So it is our win condition. It's not actually necessary. If your 4/4s stick, you can win the game without this. So it's fine either way. You don't need the 3rd copy, basically. And now Kuon, the new card that made this deck as powerful it is. I mean, Cursecrafter really is what makes it as powerful as it is. But Kuon's our new finisher. Dimension Shift obviously has been a card since set 1 and has very infrequently been good. Really the set 1 and maybe set 2 metas are the only time it was notable. But now Kuon is our Flame Destroyer replacement, so no longer are we playing a 9-drop 7/7, we're now playing a 15-drop 5/5. Stat-wise, that may seem like a downgrade, but let me tell you, this card's pretty good. Costs 1 less to play for every spell and Onmyoji card in your cemetery, so of course that is the vast majority of the deck, outside of like Merlin and Penguin Wizard. Basically everything else reduces Kuon's cost. The goal is to get this to cost 0, so you can play multiple of them on the turn that you Dimension Shift. Fanfare, if there's no Celestial Shikigami on your field, summon one. So you can't get multiples of this token, but it is a 4/5 with Aura. Kuon's activated ability, Engage, to select up to 2 Shikigami followers on your field and give them Storm. So this means, under normal circumstances, basically you get the spell chain, quote-unquote, 15, play Kuon for 0, make the token, engage, hit your opponent for 4, play Dimension Shift, untap with both of them, hit your opponent for 9, since you don't have a 5/5 and a 4/5. That is already 13 damage, minimum, basically. If you have a second Kuon that you can play, you won't be able to make another token, but it is still another 0-cost 5/5 that you will untap with on your extra turn. So that allows you to get 18 damage. You still have 8 play points on your additional turn, so Merlin with Truth's Adjudication can get you to 21 if you've already discarded it, or 24 if you haven't. It means that for very few cards that you actually need, you can get very large amounts of damage on these turns, assuming your opponent doesn't have any wards or anything, or any removal. But oftentimes, even if they do have good removal, you can still find ways to push just enough damage through. Looking at the deck as a whole, it is very powerful. It's probably like the expected best deck this format, the number 1 deck. I had it in tier 1 on my tier list. I think it can handle a lot of threats. You have enough removal to handle a lot of the mid-rangey decks, early game decks. You can definitely win any game where you make it into the late game safely. And it's very hard to stop the finisher turn once it gets there. So you kind of have a bit of pseudo inevitability. It's not entirely inevitable, but since some decks can heal out of range, or hold up, just enough removal to sort of kill everything that you try to take an extra turn with. But that's few and far between. Most of the time you will be killing once you go for the D-shift turn. Pros of the deck, you have a lot of ability to filter cards out of your hand and quickly find pieces that you want, between Penguin Wizard and all of the paper Shikigamis allowing you to draw ditch. Not only does this mean you're achieving your goal of spell chain quickly, but you're getting rid of any cards you don't want to find more removal spells or more draw spells, more Merlins, Curse Crafters, whatever you're looking for. You have a lot of ways to find. You have very efficient mid-game removal. Obviously, Curse Crafter, we talked about, that card is just ridiculous. Merlin evolving to cast spells for free and then still attack as a 4/3. Things like that are just hyper efficient in this deck. Even Demon Caller being 7 damage that you can attack with allows you to trade up in almost every situation where you're trying to remove things. And of course, our finisher setup is very nearly an OTK, if not actually an OTK, where we can do 20 or more damage in a single turn. So it doesn't actually matter how much pressure we're putting on our opponent throughout the game, as long as we're achieving our end goal. Some cons of the deck is it's weak to wide aggro in the early game. Aggro decks that can just play a bunch of 1-drops are hard to deal with, because all of our early game removal spells are pretty much just 1-for-1s. Things like Angelic Snipe, Wind Blast, Surefire Bullet, they're only answering 1 follower on board. So if our opponent plays 3 1-drops in the first 2 turns, we can probably only answer 1 or 2 of them. And we're still going to be taking some hits while we try to find answers for the others. This can often put us behind in sort of removal to threat ratio, where once we do finally find the answer for the multiple followers our opponent has played, they've likely played multiple more. And until you get to a point where you can like Crimson Meteor Storm or Curse Crafter to try to kill like 3 things at once, you're probably taking a lot of damage. And against some of these decks, if they have Storm damage, even once you clear their board, they might be able to find that last little chip that they need to kill you. And those are the decks where you will probably be dying before you actually reach your spell chain requirements, or potentially even before you reach the number of play points you would need to D-shift anyway. So those are your bad matchups, and we actually saw this in the Grand Prix for BP06 in Japan. From what I understand, at least, a lot of Japan was actually expecting this D-shift deck to be the big bad boogeyman of the format, but only one of them actually ended up top 8ing, and it actually had the worst record of any top 8 deck, because the rest of the format was all of these very powerful, aggressive decks. Things like the Fairy Forest deck, things like Sanguine Abyss, things like Fable Haven, where they were just outspeeding all of the Kuon decks. And that's where you see sort of the cut, like the third Penguin Wizard gets cut out. A lot of them were playing Sorcery Cache beforehand, which is obviously a very slow card if you're against an aggro deck. A lot of these got cut out for extra removal or extra defensive options. And that helped it in the CP02 meta, where this deck succeeded, this list in particular succeeded, against a similar format of aggro decks. The other con is that your finisher damage can be held back by ward-heavy boards. Obviously, you're trying to give Storm to the 4/5 token. That 4/5 is not going to get through if your opponent has wards. Even if you have a little bit of removal you can play, a lot of the decks that are warding up are making, 3 or 4 wards at once. And you just can't get through that. So you'll have to basically forego your Storm damage on any of those, and instead rely on just untapping with like a Crimson Meteor Storm or something and getting your damage through afterwards. It won't always be enough to stop you, but it can stop anywhere from like 4 to 8 damage. And sometimes that can be enough, so you have to keep that in mind when you're trying to set up your kill turns. Looking at the deck as a whole, again, I think this deck is incredibly powerful. I expect to see a ton of it this weekend at the Grand Showdown. It is, as I said, probably one of the most anticipated decks of this format. I think this list is pretty representative of what you'll see. I know some people have been messing around with a lot of different options in the decks, so play around with it. There are, of course, things like Agnes Tachyon, a lot of other spell options, Magic Owl, things like that you can try out. So mess around with it, see which ones you like. You can, of course, use the code, as always, 3FKHW, to check out the deck log page, maybe do some copy and edits from there. And as usual, thank you for watching. This deck is great. As I said, definitely expect to see a lot of it. Let me know what you think of it in the comments below, whether you're a fan or not, whether you want to see Curse Crafter restricted or not. Let me know what other decks you want to see. I know some people have been asking for things like Lashena, which is sort of a variation of this deck at this point. I'll probably cover the rest of the classes first, and then go back through and sort of start doing secondary decks for each of the classes. I guess also let me know what you think is going to do well at the Grand Showdown this weekend. This video should be going up Thursday or Friday, so the Grand Showdown will be in a day or two. So yeah, let me know what you expect to do well. Let me know if you think this Kuon deck is going to do real well. And until then, should have some videos up on the screen for you to watch, so we'll see you next time.